Mike. 22. Compost in 18th of days. The explosion hack. Have you ever looked at that pile of garden debris in the corner of your yard and felt a sense of defeat? You've been told for years that composting is this magical, effortless process where you just toss and forget. Yet here you are, 6 months later, staring at a heap of dry leaves and old tomato vines that look exactly the same as the day you pulled them. It's frustrating, right? You want that rich, dark, black gold to feed your spring seedlings, but instead you have a soggy mess or a dry mound of nothing. Well, I've been there. I remember my first garden in a little suburban lot in Illinois. I spent a fortune on fancy organic fertilizers because my own compost pile was essentially a cold statue of my gardening failures. I didn't realize that I was missing the spark that turns a rotting pile into a biological furnace. Today, that changes for you. I'm going to show you how to take control of that biology and produce finished, nutrient-dense compost in just 18 days. We aren't just letting things rot. We are creating a controlled thermal explosion that destroys weed seeds, kills pathogens, and creates the best soil your plants have ever tasted. By the 0-15 mark, I'm promising you this. We are going to break the 18-day barrier together using a method that doesn't require a degree in biochemistry. By 0-35, I'm going to show you why your current pile is likely suffocating and how a simple change in your layering can fix it. And by the time we hit the 0-55 second mark, we are diving straight into plant item ingredient Harswan, which is the green engine of your pile. You see, the biggest myth in gardening is that composting has to be slow. Nature is slow when she's left alone, but when we provide the right environment, she works at lightning speed. What nobody tells you at the big box stores, while they're trying to sell you a $200 plastic tumbler, is that those tumblers often lack the volume to actually get hot. They are great for convenience, but if you want that 18-day turnaround, you need mass, you need air, and you need the right fuel. Let's talk about that fuel. In the American backyard, we have an abundance of resources we often overlook. Think about your lawn. Every time you mow, you're sitting on a gold mine of nitrogen. Most people bag it and leave it at the curb for the city to pick up. That's like throwing money in the trash. Fresh grass clippings are the high-octane gas for your compost engine. But this is a big, but if you just pile them up, they turn into a thick anaerobic mat that smells like a swamp. I've made that mistake more times than I care to admit. I once created a pile that was so heavy on grass that my neighbors thought I had a broken sewer line. That was my protector moment. I learned the hard way so you don't have to. The secret isn't just the nitrogen, it's the balance. We call this the CN ratio, or carbon to nitrogen. For our 18-day explosion, we are aiming for roughly 25 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Now, don't let those numbers scare you. You don't need a calculator in the garden. Think of it in volumes. If you have 2 big bags of dry, crunchy browns, like fallen oak leaves or shredded cardboard, you want about 1 bag of greens, like those grass clippings or your kitchen scraps. When you layer these correctly, you're creating a buffet for the thermophilic bacteria, the guys who love the heat. These are the power workers of the soil world. When they start eating, they generate heat as a byproduct of their metabolism. In a well-built pile, that temperature can skyrocket to 140 or even 160 degrees Fahrenheit within just 48 hours. That is hot enough to cook an egg, and more importantly, it's hot enough to melt the waxy coating on weed seeds so they can never sprout in your garden. I remember the first time I actually saw my pile steam. It was a chilly morning in late October. I went out with my coffee and I saw this thick plume of white vapor rising from my compost bin. I thought for a second something was on fire, but when I stuck my pitchfork in and turned it, the smell was earthy and sweet, not rotten. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just a piler anymore. I was a gardener who understood the life of the soil. If you felt like you have a black thumb because your compost won't break down, I want to validate you right now. It's not your fault. Most of the advice out there is for cold composting, which takes forever. Hot composting is a different beast entirely, and it's much more rewarding. One of the most important things you need to do today is find your space. The 3x3x3 rule is non-negotiable for the 18-day method. You need 3 feet of width, 3 feet of depth, and 3 feet of height. This is the minimum volume required to insulate the core. If your pile is too small, the heat escapes into the atmosphere faster than the bacteria can produce it. It's like trying to heat a drafty old house with a single candle. But when you hit that 3-foot cubic mark, the outer layers of the compost act as a blanket, keeping the center cooking. I built my first serious bin using old heat-treated pallets I found behind a local grocery store. They were free, they provided great airflow, and they were exactly the right size. Just make sure you look for the HT stamp on the pallets. That means they were heat-treated and not sprayed with nasty chemicals. When you start layering, start with the browns at the bottom. Think of this as the foundation of your house. Use some coarser material like small twigs or dried corn stalks at the very base. This creates a chimney effect, allowing air to be pulled up from the bottom as the hot air rises through the middle. If you pack the bottom too tight with wet scraps, you'll choke the pile before it even starts. I used to just throw everything in a heap, but once I started building my pile with intentionality, the speed of decomposition tripled. You're not just making a pile, you're building a biological reactor. But here is a little secret. Even with the perfect layers, there is one invisible ingredient that most people forget, especially in the drier parts of the country or during a hot American summer. If this one thing is missing, your microbes will go into hibernation and your 18-day clock will stop dead in its tracks. You know why this heat happens even when you water correctly, but the pile still stays dormant? I'll show you the reason in the next part. The invisible ingredient that most people overlook is consistent, internal moisture. It sounds simple, but this is where I see most American gardeners fail. We tend to water the outside of things. We water the leaves of our plants, the top of our soil, and the surface of our compost. But the 18-day explosion happens in the dark, pressurized center of the heap. If that core is dry, your microbes are effectively paralyzed. Think of them like tiny marathon runners. They are doing an incredible amount of work, and they are thirsty. If you don't hydrate the layers as you build the pile, the water will never penetrate the thatch of dry leaves or straw you've put in. I once spent a whole Saturday building a perfect 3x3x3 pile, only to realize a week later that the center was bone dry. It was like a desert in there, even though the outside was damp from a light rain. This is where the squeeze test comes in, a practical, today, action you can do right now. Reach into the middle of your pile, carefully, if it's already hot. Grab a handful of the material and squeeze it as hard as you can. You want it to feel like a damp sponge that has been thoroughly wrung out. You should see maybe 1 or 2 drops of water escape between your knuckles. If it's dripping like a leaky faucet, it's too wet, and you're drowning the oxygen out. If it feels like dry paper, you need to get the hose out. When I'm building a new pile, I keep the hose on a very light trickle and spray every single 4-inch layer as I add it. It takes an extra 5 minutes, but it saves you 5 months of waiting. Now, let's talk about the protector aspect of your pile. What nobody tells you at the store is that certain green items are actually traps. For example, people often throw in a lot of fruit, scraps leftover watermelon rinds from a summer cookout, or bags of old apples. While these are great for nitrogen, they are very high in sugar. In the heat of a July afternoon in Georgia or Texas, a sugary compost pile without enough browns becomes a magnet for every fly and wasp in the county. If you want to keep the peace with your family and your neighbors, you have to bury those sweet greens deep in the center of the pile and cover them with at least 6 inches of dry carbon. I learned this after a very awkward conversation with my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, when a cloud of fruit flies took over her porch. It wasn't the plant's fault, it was my management. Speaking of neighbors, let's talk about the common enemy, the showcase garden mentality. We see these perfectly manicured lawns on TV and in magazines where every leaf is swept away and every blade of grass is treated with synthetic chemicals. That lifestyle is the enemy of the 18-day compost. Those chemicals can actually kill the very microbes we are trying to breed. If you use a weed and feed service on your lawn, do not put those clippings in your 18-day hot pile. The herbicides used in many commercial lawn treatments are designed to survive the composting process and can actually stunt or kill your tomato plants next year. I've seen people ruin their entire vegetable garden because they used toxic grass clippings. This is why I advocate for a more natural approach. It saves you money and it keeps your compost clean. As we move into the actual 18-day schedule, the turn is your primary engine. For the first 4 days, you do nothing. You let the party start. The bacteria are multiplying, the temperature is rising, and the pile is settling. On day 5, you perform your first turn. This is the most labor-intensive part, but it's where the magic happens. You want to move the material from the outside of the pile to the inside and the inside to the outside. This ensures that every single scrap of waste gets its turn in the furnace. If you just leave the pile alone, only the center will decompose, and the outside will just sit there, looking like garbage. I use a high-quality pitchfork, something with thin, strong tines that can lift the heavy, wet material without breaking my back. If you're still using a shovel to move compost, you're making it 10 times harder than it needs to be. I remember a specific time when I was struggling with a pile that just wouldn't stay hot. It would spike to 130 degrees and then drop back down to 90 within a day. I realized I was turning it too much. By turning it every single day, I was letting all the heat escape before it could stabilize. Composting is about rhythm. You have to give the microbes time to build their community before you go in and stir things up. It's like baking a cake. If you keep opening the oven door to peak, the temperature drops and the cake falls flat. Once I switched to the every other day turning schedule after day 4, the pile stayed at a rock-solid 150 degrees for over a week. You might be wondering, what if I live in an apartment or a place with a very small backyard? Does this still work for me? It does, but the scale changes the rules of the game. You don't have the luxury of a massive 3x3x3 pile, but you have other advantages. In the next part, I'll show you the small space adjustment that allows you to get these same results in a fraction of the footprint, and I'll explain the 10-second rule that prevents 80% of plant deaths when you finally go to use your finished black gold. In an apartment or a small suburban condo, you might not have the space for a massive wooden bin system, but that doesn't mean you're locked out of the 18-day gold rush. The small space adjustment is all about density and insulation. If you can't go wide, you have to go smart. Many people try to use those small plastic 5-gallon buckets, but as I mentioned before, they lose heat too fast. The hack here is to use a heavy-duty fabric aeration bag, something in the 30 to 45-gallon range. Because the fabric breathes, it prevents the anaerobic slime that usually kills small-scale composting. To keep the heat in, I've seen successful urban gardeners wrap these bags in a bit of old carpet or a moving blanket. It sounds funny, but you're essentially giving your microbes a winter coat so they can keep working in a smaller volume. However, regardless of the size of your pile, there is a critical point around day 10 to day 12 where most people start to see their pile crash. The temperature drops, and they think the process is over. I made this mistake early on in my gardening journey. I thought the drop in temperature meant the compost was finished, so I spread it on my flower beds. 2 weeks later, my flowers started turning yellow and stunted. I was devastated. I realized later that the pile hadn't crashed because it was finished. It had crashed because the microbes had eaten all the easy food and were starving for a little more nitrogen. This is the protector tip I want you to remember. A drop in heat on day 12 usually means your workers need a snack. If you toss in a few more coffee grounds or a handful of blood meal, you'll see that temperature spike right back up within 6 hours. The funny thing is, the problem is almost never the plant or the scraps. It's the pot. Or, in this case, the way we handle the finished product. This leads me to the 10-second rule that prevents 80% of plant deaths. When your 18-day cycle is nearing the end, you'll be tempted to take that dark, steaming material and bury your seedling roots directly in it. Don't do it! Freshly cooked, hot compost is extremely high in microbial activity and can sometimes be a bit too hot, chemically speaking, for tender young roots. The 10-second rule is simple. Take a handful of your finished compost and smell it. If it smells like anything other than clean, sweet earth, if there's even a hint of ammonia or sharpness, it needs another 3 days to cure. True, black gold should smell so good you almost want to bring it into the house. As we move into the final stretch of the 18-day timeline, you'll notice the physical structure of your pile has changed. The original shapes of the leaves and the vegetable peels are gone. It's now a homogeneous, dark brown mass. At this stage, day 14 through day 18, you can slow down the turning. You want the pile to begin cooling down naturally, so that the secondary workers, the fungi, and the larger beneficial organisms can move back in. The high-heat bacteria have done the heavy lifting of breaking down the tough fibers, but the fungi are the ones that create the long-term glue in your soil that holds onto water and nutrients. I used to think the heat was the only thing that mattered, but the cooling phase is where the true nutritional complexity is born. I want to share a micro-story about a subscriber named Tom from Ohio. Tom followed the 18-day method to the letter, but he called me panicked because his pile was full of white, fuzzy stuff on day 16. He thought it was a mold outbreak and wanted to throw it all away. I told him, "Tom, congratulations, that white fuzz is actinomycetes. It's a type of bacteria that looks like fungi and is a sign that your compost is reaching a premium elite level of quality. It's actually what gives healthy soil that earthy smell. If you see that white fuzz in the final days, you haven't failed, you've won the gardening lottery. It's a sign that your black gold is ready to act as a natural antibiotic for your garden beds." But what if you live in a climate where it's currently 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside? Can you really do this in the dead of an American winter? The answer is yes, but the physics change. In the next part, I'll tell you the adjustment that changes everything for cold weather composting, and I'll give you the rescue plan for a pile that has turned into a frozen block of ice.